Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hope everyone is staying well, staying healthy, staying isolated as much as you can. We're going to continue with the provider package series today, and we're going to cover ProxyProvider today, which is a very interesting provider. Use ProxyProvider when you have a chain of asynchronous or reactive processes where the results of the earlier part of the chain are needed for the latter. And so in this example, what we're going to do is we're going to use the geolocator package to get the coordinates of our device, pass that information to the geocoding portion of the geolocator package, and use that to determine our address and our city and our country as well. So that's the objective for today. Let's go ahead and get started.
All right, so I've given myself a project by typing Flutter create ProxyProvider. You can call it what you wish. But unsurprisingly, we will start by going into main.dart and clearing out the demo application. So let's get rid of this big block of green there, and then everything from class my homepage down. And that'll give us an error for a little bit. That's okay. Let's go to lib and let's create a new folder for screens, and just want one widget on this one. This is going to be the landing page. So inside screens, we'll create a new file and we'll call that welcome.dart, and that'll be a class of welcome, and it's going to extends stateful widget, or stateless widget, sorry. There we go. We can do the build method as well. And I'm going to get rid of this green. Well, let's just give it a blank scaffold. All right, that's enough. And then we can return to main.dart and we can take out this my home page, get rid of that error, and replace it with welcome, which we'll have to import. Okay, good. And then we want to bring in the packages before we start the application. So let's go to pub.dev in a browser. And we're going to want two packages here. One is obviously provider. So we can go to the installing tab, grab the latest version, and put that in our pubspec.yaml file right after Cupertino icons. All right, and the other is going to be geolocator. So let's find that. Okay, we can pull that latest version, bring that in just below provider, hit save, let VS Code do the import, and we have a little additional setup on geolocator. We need to set up permissions. So if we come back to the README, first of all, we need to make sure we're using Android X. So if you are not doing that, and if you have a recent version, you're automatically getting Android X. But just to check, you can come to Android. We can go to app. We can go to the build.gradle in there. I'm sorry, not there. We want Gradle properties right here for Android X. So we want to make sure that we have Android X equals true and enable Jetifier equals true. The other requirement is that in the build.gradle we have compile SDK version 28. So you will, if you have a recent build here, but you can check that by, it's this one here. Here we go. Right there. Android compile SDK version 28. So we're all set there. And then if you scroll all the way down, there's these permissions on how to use the API, geocoding, etc. And then this very, very important information about permissions down here. And so for Android, you can select either a fine or a coarse location. I'm going to select fine because we are going to put speed in this application. And so we want kind of a good read on exactly where the person is to have a good measure of their speed. And that goes in your, if you go to Android app src main, it goes in your Android manifest, and it goes before the manifest closing tag and the after the application closing tag, just like that. I am just going to do Android, but it is quick enough to set up iOS, so let's do that as well, in case you're using iOS. So you just come down here. There's an option for a background tracking of the location. We're not going to worry about that. So if you want to follow along on iOS, just copy that. Go to iOS, go to Runner, go to your info plist, go right to the bottom and paste that in. I'm just going to format it, save, and you are good to go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start it then. Start the emulator. I'm going to shrink this a little bit so we can see both. All right, and while that boots up, I want to, in the theme data, I want to make the text just a little bit larger, just the basic body text, so it's a little easier to see in the list when we go to build that. So here in main.dart, let's do a text theme, and that will be of a text theme widget. And we just want to define body 1, so I'm going to do a text style there. And I just want to do a font size, and 20 should be big enough just to make it a little bit more readable. Good. Okay, that's our application there. It's got absolutely nothing on it because welcome is just a blank scaffold at that point, so that's fine. We are going to want to deal with geolocator. Obviously, we brought that package in. We're going to want to do two things through it. We're going to want to get the coordinates of the device. We're then going to take those coordinates and we're going to pass them to a geocoding function in geolocator that will get us pieces like the address component, the city, the country, and all that. So we want to build a service for that so we don't clutter up our user interface. So let's close all this Android iOS stuff, and I'm going to create a new folder inside lib called services, and then a new file inside that called geolocator_service.dart. And that is going to be a class of geolocator service. And let's bring in an instance of our geolocator. We'll call it geo. And we'll need to import that like that. All right, so then our two functions, the first is going to be called get coordinates, or get chords, we'll call it. And that is going to be asynchronous, so let's use the async keyword. And what we want to do is we want to await our geo.getCurrentPosition. And in here I can pass a desired accuracy, and I am going to pass it location accuracy best for navigation. So, you know, pretty refined, so that if your device supports speed and you can manage to run around the room with it without it being tethered to your USB cable, you can go for it and get a good speed rating. And so we want to return that. And that's it. And if you go to the geolocator package up here, this is the documentation, and it's pretty good on geolocation. This is what we just did right here. All right, and then the next one we want to do is geocoding, which is right here as well. We're going to get a list of place marks back. So this is going to return a future position. It will do it anyway, but just to kind of give us a better picture of it. And so this is going to give us a future of list type place mark. which is an object internal to the geolocator package. And we'll call that one getAddress. And we will pass it a position, which is what you get from your coordinate search, which we will call position. And here we want to await geo.placemark from coordinates, and we can just pass it a latitude longitude, which will be our position.latitude and position.longitude. Semicolon at the end, and we want to return that. And that's it. Those are our two functions that we want our geolocator service to respond to. Okay, so let's start setting up our providers. So we can come out here to main.dart, and for the get coordinates, we want that to fire up as soon as the app is up and running. And so we can wrap material app with a widget, and that's where we can put our providers. Now, I'm going to put multi-provider. And you need to import the provider package. We'll do that there. I could auto import, but the provider package is kind of slow to be recognized sometimes, so I just manually did it there. So we want to create a future, and the future that we're going to create is going to come from our service. So let's bring in the service. We've still got this green here. I'm going to take that out, and I'm going to create a final geolocator service, which I will call my geo service, and that is going to be a new instance of geolocator service, which I need to import. And I did a capital L when I created the service for some reason, so I'm going to have to do that again. And so the multi-provider is going to have a provider array, and the first one's going to be the future provider that we want to use to bring in the coordinates. So we'll do future provider, we'll do create, we'll pass it a context, we'll do an arrow function, and our future is going to be geoservice get coordinates. And so that's going to go out. It's going to get the coordinates from the device. We're going to get a future back, and the result of that, the outcome of that search for coordinates, we are going to want to pass that to our other geo service that goes out and geocodes that. But we don't actually have that yet. We have basically set up the future provider to know we're going to get a future with the coordinates. And so when we set this up by using ProxyProvider, we are basically establishing the connection between this future and the future that we're going to call at a later time to establish the geocode. And so let me set this up, and then I can re-explain, and hopefully it'll be a little clearer. So we want a proxy provider. And what a proxy provider will do is take an input value, which will be a position, an input type, and then an output type, which is going to be, it's going to be a list of placemark, because that's what we're getting from our geolocator service, a list of placemark, but not just a list of placemark, a future list of placemark. And we're going to need the geolocator package brought in. And then we want to give the proxy provider an update. And that is going to consist of a context the input value, which we will call position, that's going to be of type position. So we'll call it position. And then the output value, which is place marks, which is going to be a future list of type place mark. All right, and that goes to an arrow function, which will be geoservice.getAddress. Nope, not coord, position. And then we pass it the position. Now, we don't want to do that if the position hasn't resolved yet, so I'm going to throw in front of that position not equal to null. I don't know how that came about. Let's try that again. Position not equal to null. Then we will give it the service there, and otherwise we will give it null. And let me expand that a little bit so you can see the whole thing. And so really we are just setting up this future. We are passing it the position from this future provider, and we are getting back a future with a list of place mark. We're going to have to resolve that in the next widget. So we have 2 values to resolve, and we're going to end up using 3 providers. That's the way ProxyProvider works. It kind of adds an additional one into the mix. But our relationship of our input parameter is established right here, and we're not going to have to add an input parameter to our future provider in our dependent widget. And that's what we're trying to avoid, because when you've got these futures that are resolving at different paces throughout the application, that is going to throw off your widget tree. It's not going to know how to paint your widgets on the screen, and we are establishing that relationship here in ProxyProvider, taking care of the fact that we are passing an argument into that future right here at the top level. So as it works down the widget tree, it knows exactly what to do. All right, so let's go to the welcome page, and let's do the first thing we need to do is we do need to resolve that future that we set up here, because we haven't resolved the future. We've just set it up with a parameter here. So we do need to resolve it. So let's wrap the scaffold with a widget, and that will be a future provider. So we'll take care of that right up the top here. And that future provider will need a create. It will take a context. Typing is off today. All right, so we need to pass it something. What do we want to pass it? Let me import provider. We want to pass it the outcome of our proxy provider right here. So we can do that by bringing that in, and I'm going to call it address proxy. We'll bring in our proxy provider, which we can do with provider of context, semicolon, and when we provide it with our generic value, we want that to be of future list place mark. 1, 2, 3 closings, and we're going to need the geolocator package. I'm just going to grab it from here. And so when we pass a future provider, our future provider a value, we're going to pass it address proxy like that. And so for our body, let's just make sure our address proxy is not equal to null before we render anything. And we're doing that because in our service, or I'm sorry, back here in our future provider, we said don't set this up. We said if this isn't, if the position hasn't been resolved yet, return null. So in our welcome, if we know that if proxy equals null, then it doesn't yet have the position from the geolocator to be able to proceed. So if the proxy is not equal to null, then we want to return something. So let's just return a center widget with a child for now, the text that says I worked. And then otherwise, we want a circular progress indicator. And in fact, we want to center that as well. So let's just wrap that with a center widget. And so while it's still looking for that, we'll get a spinner, and then when it's done, we'll get this this text "I worked," and we can see that that happened. So let's just let's go ahead and restart the state, and you can see a brief spinner there while it goes and finds what it's looking for, and we can see that it's already resolved itself. So we at least know that is working. Okay, so that tells us our second future is receiving information, but it isn't yet resolved. So we have to bring in a consumer to act upon this future provider right here. So let's bring in a consumer here, and that will be of type list placemark. And that consumer will need a builder widget, so I'm going to hit enter or space and enter, so I move on to the next line. And our builder, we will pass that, we can pass it a context, we can pass it our dynamic value, which we'll call an address list, so that'll be a list of place marks. And then we can just pass it this widget. You can also do just underscore on context and a double underscore on widget if you want to. Those are kind of useless for our purposes. And so here we want to return a value. And so we also want to check, make sure this has been resolved. So we'll say return, and we'll do a ternary expression where we check to see if the address list is not equal to null. And then we're going to set up another split logic here, and this is where we'll put our I worked, and then if it didn't, we will put another spinner widget here. I'm just going to do just like this. All right, we can save that. We can do another restart, and you'll see a spinner slightly longer because it is resolving both of those futures before it shows. When it's resolving the first future, we get this spinner, but because it's centered, it's replaced. When we go to the second future, while that works on that, we get this spinner, but they just kind of blend together because they're occupy the same spot. And the result is a spinner that lasts until we get to this I worked. So this is where we want to display our data, and what I want to do is display a list, and I'm going to come down here and build a helper function for that. And so we'll call it underscore build list. It'll be a return type widget. And into this, we're going to want to pass the position that we get from our first future and the first place mark that we get from our second. So, you could conceivably get back a list of locations that you might be in from geolocator. We're just going to worry about the first one that we get back from that. So let's return a list view here. And we will give it some children. Go ahead and put my semicolon just to make it happy for now. And what I want to return is a series of list tiles. So let's do one that has a title with a text that says your position. And I'm going to add a style to that. We'll do text style, and I just want to make the font size bigger. So font size 25.0 is fine. And then I want to do another list tile. And here's where I want to start to do, this is kind of the header here, the your position. Here's where I want to start to do a 2-column with a value on the left, like a label on the left and a value on the right. So I'm going to do a leading, and that'll be a text widget, and it's going to be called latitude. And then we'll do a trailing widget, which will also be a text, and that will be position.latitude.toString. And why don't I go ahead and replace this center with build list. And to get my position, I can bring that in from main.dart. We've got a provider that is set up, so I can come up here and do final position equal to provider.of context, and then give it my type that I'm looking for here as position. And that will scope that in there. And then for place mark, I want address list, and I'm just going to pass in the very first item that we get. All right, so I can see I'm starting to get the values up here. I'm going to take this row and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to replace latitude with longitude. Okay, copy and paste again, and we'll do speed there. EED. Yeah, that's just string as well. And maybe we'll do speed meters per second, because that's the value you get. All right. Copy and paste. I'm going to do 3 more. And so let's do city here. And that we're going to get from our place mark. So place mark dot locality is going to be city. And then we can do country. And then the last one I'm going to do is flag. Just for fun here, I'm going to take out the text widget. And instead of text widget, I'm going to do an image there. And so that will be an image.network. And I'm going to go to a website that is called countryflags.io. And it has a whole bunch of different country flags, hopefully yours, by their 2-digit code. And so you can copy from the example here. I'm going to take the flat flag. I'm just going to take the URL in there. And I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to paste that inside of here, inside a string. And I'm going to replace the 64 to a 32 PNG. That's the size. And then I'm going to get rid of the country code, which is right here, and instead do $ and curly braces. And inside the curly braces, I'm going to do placemark.iso country code, which is what these are encoded as. So hopefully, if your flag is supported, your country will be displayed here, and then your flag will be displayed right there. And so that is going to be a wrap on that one. This was the provider series on ProxyProvider, and what we did is we took the two futures, one of which depended on the result from the other. We linked them with the ProxyProvider. We set that up here. We brought the future in here in the widget, in the down a little further in the tree, and we were able to use values from both of those right here. Could you have done this a different way? Absolutely. You could have. In your geolocator service, we could have created one function that returned a combination of these items, awaited this, and then just return one future. And then you could return either a map with keyed values that you could pull from. You could have created a custom object that had latitude, longitude, and the properties that you wanted from either one of these. But this is another way to go about it. Doesn't hurt to have more approaches in your tool belt. if you are writing an app and you feel like ProxyProvider is going to work well for your particular situation, well, it's there for your use. So I hope you found that helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you found this useful, and we'll see you in the next video.